These days, we take incredible storytelling in games for granted. Complex, intricate narratives and character-driven plots are the norm. Similarly, we expect great voice acting, and it's more notable when it's disappointing or just plain awful. But cast your eyes back about 30 years, to the 90s, and the landscape is completely different. Gameplay is king, and storytelling in games is in its infancy. Not only that, voice acting for the most part is not really up to snuff. There are exceptions, of course. Tomb Raider gave us a very likable character, and Deus Ex gave us a complex cyberpunk political drama, though the voice acting still kinda sucked. Today I'm going to talk to you about another exception, a complex Shakespearean gothic drama of vampires, spirits, different worlds, changes in the timeline, time travel, paradoxes, prophecies, and deep contemplations of choice and the nature of free will. So relax, and let me tell you everything you need to know about Legacy of Kain. The first entry into the Legacy of Kain series, titled Blood Omen: Legacy of Kain, was developed by Silicon Knights, a company whose other credits in the industry include the cult horror classic Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem for the Nintendo GameCube, and Too Human for the Xbox 360. At the time, Silicon Knights pitched Blood Omen, Too Human, and a third unknown concept to several publishers, and it would be Crystal Dynamics that picked the game up for publication, impressed by the scope of the game, the fantasy gothic setting, and the passion that Silicon Knights showed for the project. And it was an ambitious game for sure, so much so that, as it tends to happen, the team size ballooned, and Crystal Dynamics even sent some of their own people to Canada to help Silicon Knights wrangle in that design. Among them was Amy Hennig, who acted as design manager for Blood Omen, and would later be much more influential to the series. Blood Omen: Legacy of Kain would release in November 1996 to favorable reviews and was considered a commercial success for publisher and developer alike. Now afterwards, while Silicon Knights was gearing up for the development of the next entry into what they hoped would be a series of Blood Omen sequels, Crystal Dynamics more or less had the same idea. At the time, Amy Hennig and her colleagues were working on the prototype of a game codenamed Shifter, an angelic-themed game that would allow players to travel between two worlds. At the behest of upper management, though, the game was retooled as a Legacy of Kain entry, with its mythology and plot adapted into the world of Nosgoth. Understandably so, Silicon Knights did not take kindly to it, and filed an injunction against their former publisher, accusing them, among other things, of plagiarizing the concept for the Blood Omen sequel, perhaps not aware of the existence of Shifter. This led to a legal dispute between the two companies, and though the details of the proceedings are not well known, in fact, I've looked into it, and as far as I'm aware, no one involved has ever publicly spoken about it, most likely to a few NDAs. But the end result was, it was settled privately, and Crystal Dynamics was allowed to continue with the development of any Legacy of Kain game, but they had to credit Silicon Knights as the creators of the series. Shifter would release as Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver in 1999 for the PlayStation, and much like its predecessor, was received favorably and sold pretty well. It also marked the first game in what would be Crystal Dynamics' run with the Legacy of Kain franchise, which had the sequel to Soul Reaver, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver 2, then a sequel to Blood Omen, Blood Omen 2, and then Legacy of Kain Defiance, the final mainline entry into the series, and which left the overall plot in something of a cliffhanger. Most of the titles were both written and directed by Amy Hennig, except for Blood Omen 2, which was developed by a separate team while Soul Reaver 2 was still in development and did not involve Hennig at all. This led to some issues, but we'll get to them later. Silicon Knights, on the other hand, would never make another Legacy of Kain game. After Defiance, while Crystal Dynamics was taking over core design in the handling of the Tomb Raider franchise, Amy Hennig requested working on that franchise, but was rejected. Thus, she left Crystal Dynamics for Naughty Dog, where she created the Uncharted series. I'm sure we can all appreciate the irony in that. But without her, and after Defiance, the series has been dormant, with only a team-based shooter created for it called Nosgoth, which didn't even make it out of beta. The Legacy of Kain series takes place in the land of Nosgoth, a place where the natural forces are controlled by a set of 9 pillars, each of them representing one force of nature. They are the mind, dimension, conflict, nature, energy, time, states, death, and one to keep the ball in check, balance. Each pillar is also symbiotically linked to a guardian. The health of the pillar linked to the health of the guardian. Blood Omen begins with the brutal murder of the guardian of balance, Ariel. Her lover, the guardian of the mind, Napraptor, finds her body, and his grief sends him into the depths of madness, corrupting his pillar and the rest of the guardians, the Circle of Nine. Enter Kain, a nobleman murdered outside of a tavern, and offered the chance to return, and driven by vengeance, he accepts and comes back as a vampire. Within minutes of leaving his crypt, he finds and dispatches his killers, thinking then, hey, my quest is over, only to discover it's not so simple. They were just the tools, but the real culprits, the real ones at fault, are the corrupted members of the Circle. So his quest begins in earnest, to become the assassin that will cleanse the Circle and restore the pillars. Now, I'm gonna have to do a bit of a spoiler here. It's a minor thing, but it's that Blood Omen had more than one ending, and the games and Crystal Dynamics series take one of them as canon. That's all. Move forward a millennium to the time of Soul Reaver, and Nosgoth is a dead husk of a world, the pillars having long since crumbled. Kain rules his empire with his lieutenants, and according to their culture and hierarchy, Kain enters what they describe as a state of change, a process by which he gains a new power or gift, and after him, his lieutenants would follow. Until our protagonist, Raziel, sprouts a couple of wings, let's just say ahead of schedule. This earns him, very reasonably, an execution. To burn forever, as they say, in the bowels of the Lake of the Dead, a giant whirlpool that, like all water in Nosgoth, is like acid to vampires, much like sunlight destroys them. Raziel's body is nearly decimated, but he survives, in a way, returning as a wraith, and much like Kain after his own return, on a path for vengeance. Kain's and Raziel's journeys are interesting because they don't just cover miles in distance, but also centuries of time travel, along with paradoxes and more than a few prophecies, along with all the manipulators and masterminds they deal with that control Nosgoth from the shadows. Their journeys also involve, and in fact it's a key element of it, the Soul Reaver, a mythical blade with the power to steal the souls of those struck by it. As the series progresses, this relic becomes as much of a character as Raziel and Kain themselves. In terms of the other games, Soul Reaver 2 picks up after the end of Soul Reaver 1, given that Soul Reaver 1 ends with a literal to be continued screen. Raziel continues his pursuit of his quarry throughout several eras of Nosgoth's past, discovering hidden truths and curious prophecies along the way. The prologue of Blood Omen 2 takes place about 200 years after Blood Omen, and Kain is on the warpath, on his way to conquering Nosgoth. Unfortunately for him, he faces in battle a revived order of holy warriors, of sacred vampire killers, the Seraphim, and he's swiftly defeated and ends up in a coma for about 200 more years, waking up in the city of Meridian, the capital of Nosgoth, that's now advanced to something of a steampunk society, and with the Seraphim very much in control. So now his quest is simple: regain his strength, get his power back, vanquish his enemies, and continue on the conquest of Nosgoth. This is the game that I mentioned did not include Amy Hennig nor her unified vision of world lore and story. So they include characters that shouldn't be there, and their behavior is inconsistent with the way they're portrayed in other games. This created some massive, gaping holes in the overall mythos that were never truly alleviated. Then Defiance continues the plot of Soul Reaver 2, but now with both Kain and Raziel's points of view. As I mentioned, it ends in something of a cliffhanger, but it does have a lot of revelations and sets up what would be the endgame of the entire plot, which makes it even more frustrating that there isn't a continuation. Now, when I say that Defiance ends in a cliffhanger, I mean it more in terms of the overall series plot, that narrative thread that Amy Hennig built from Soul Reaver onwards. The game itself does have an ending. It even has a final boss. It's just there are threads left unresolved, which is a consistent thing with the series. Soul Reaver ends in a giant to be continued screen, and Soul Reaver 2 has an even bigger cliffhanger ending. The storytelling is the high point of the Legacy of Kain franchise, a complex story of manipulation and betrayal, paradoxes, prophecies, and trying to reclaim and enforce free will in a world where it seems like fate has the last laugh. There are questions at every turn, and it's the kind of game where every time you get an answer, it just spawns more questions especially as you advance and discover more about the world and the places where its mythology and its history kinda mesh together. The dialogue is superb and Shakespearean in nature. In fact, the works of the bard are a clear inspiration, and there are even some direct quotes. Characters often have ponderous monologues or discussions with deep introspection, and much like other works of Shakespeare, the story is told at several levels, not just with the main character or the great masterminds that control the fate of everyone, but also down to the low level, say the beggars in Blood Omen, or the lowly surviving humans in Kain's Empire. Characters are outstanding. They're complex, with different motivations and points of view, and circumstances that led to those points of view. So there isn't a truly good character in the series, nor a truly evil one. Even the antagonists, when you put yourself in their shoes, turns out most of them are just trying to do what they think is right. Of course, there are exceptions. Characters for whom making a case for is very difficult. A certain Oracle of Nosgoth comes to mind. But they're the exception that prove the rule. This is a gothic tale, and it has all the trappings of the genre, be it the influence of the supernatural, vampires, ghosts. Nosgoth is a gloomy world where fear, gruesome violence, and just terror are part of day-to-day life. In Gothic tales, the past is always coming back to haunt the characters. And so, in this game about time travel, this is elevated, as it's not just the past, but also the present and the future that comes back to bite our characters in the butt. Gameplay-wise, the Legacy of Kain series is quite varied. Blood Omen is a 2D isometric hack-and-slash game. Imagine The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past with the visuals of Diablo. You have dozens of ways to make your way across Nosgoth. You can use whatever tools you have at your disposal, be it a bunch of spells like energy bolts or the ability to turn enemies against one another or just drain all their blood, to items that give you, say, unlimited mana, or flay your enemies alive or just make them all decompose, to shapeshifting. You can become mist or bats or a wolf, which more or less is a werewolf. This game might be more than 25 years old, but damn, it holds up. Soul Reaver 1 and 2 are very much in that late 90s era of 3D game design, where you end up, for most puzzles, pushing a lot of boxes. Though Soul Reaver 2 has a bit more variety in the puzzle design. In fact, some of them involve platforming as part of the puzzles, which is pretty interesting. The combat is a bit janky, but very satisfying, as the vampiric enemies you fight cannot simply be defeated. You have to actually destroy them, plunge them in water, impale them and drain their souls, or put them against the sun. It adds a puzzle element to the combat, and it's deeply satisfying. And this extends to the boss fights, which themselves are just giant puzzles. You never actually fight a boss one-on-one just using physical attacks. Some form of puzzle element is involved in the battle, as these creatures are far larger, far bigger, far more powerful than you are. Not only that, the game also has that Metroidvania thing of acquiring new powers that grant you more traversal options and not just combat prowess. Best of all, this game is built around the relationship of the material plane and the spirit world. Remember, this is Shifter. You move in between two worlds. What is a giant gap in the spirit world might just be a short hop in the material plane. Similarly, an impenetrable barrier in the physical plane might just be traversable in the spirit world. And these realms have their own physics. Blood Omen 2 followed a similar design with a greater emphasis in combat, though puzzles are still part of the experience. This is something of the black sheep of the family. As I mentioned, Amy Hennig was not involved in this game, and it doesn't have the same level of quality or polish as, say, Soul Reaver and Soul Reaver 2 have. You can tell the difference in quality and polish just in the lip sync alone. Soul Reaver 2's lip sync is actually incredibly detailed for a time. Sure, the visuals haven't aged that well, but you can still see that the lip sync is pretty accurate, while Blood Omen 2's lip sync is puppet-like. But there is still plenty to find and enjoy in Blood Omen 2. Defiance took the series in more of a direction of Devil May Cry, with fast-paced combos and juggling enemies, and your progress is more often than not hampered not by puzzles, though there are some of those, but by combat arenas, where you have to juggle enemies and kill them in creative ways, or throw them against walls or just drain them. Best of all, you play as both Kain and Raziel, and they feel very distinct as characters in terms of their abilities. And as I mentioned, there are still puzzles in this game, though they are significantly weaker or simpler compared to previous entries in the series. But what truly carries the experience forward, what makes that plot come across so wonderfully, what makes those Shakespearean soliloquies be engaging at all times, are the performances. The voice acting is out of this world. Michael Bell as Raziel and Simon Templeman as Kain kill it every time, and show you so many layers of these complex characters, inexorably linked but often at odds. In terms of voice acting though, we cannot forget or understate the accomplishments of the late Tony Jay, who voiced Mortanius in Blood Omen, the Elder God in Soul Reaver onwards, and many more characters across the series. His baritone voice lent such gravitas and presence to all the different characters he played. They immediately command the scene and are truly intimidating. Best of all, the series always kept most of its voice cast. So every time you're interacting with a character, say the Vampire Vorador or the Spectre of the Guardian of Balance Ariel, you're always hearing the same voices, which is phenomenal. There are two main entry points into the series, Blood Omen or Soul Reaver. If you choose Blood Omen, you'll gain a greater understanding of Nosgoth, the Pillars, and of course, Kain, though later games do a great job of explaining that. If you go from Soul Reaver onwards, then you should play them in the order they were released. That is Soul Reaver, then Soul Reaver 2, then Blood Omen 2, and lastly Defiance. The reason for this is though Blood Omen 2 is a sequel to Blood Omen 1, there are elements of it that you cannot fully understand unless you play Soul Reaver 2 first. Defiance though must be the last game you play, and then you can join us, all the fans around the world that clamor for another entry into the series. We need you. We need to take shifts in terms of begging for more. Now, I must mention something about these games. You may have issues playing them on modern PCs. These are old games, so there are compatibility issues. Having said so, the fandom is full of incredibly talented individuals who have created texture packs, mods, add-ons that allow you to play these games properly on modern PCs. And so you don't have to scour the internet for them, I'm gonna link them all in the description of this video. But if you use them, then you have to promise me to like and share the video. Hey, it's only fair. Legacy of Kain is a masterclass in storytelling and voice acting, and its varied gameplay across the games is bound to keep you entertained. So even if one game isn't your cup of tea in terms of gameplay, hey, the next one is completely different, so you might just enjoy it. If you like this video and you're interested in the Legacy of Kain franchise, or you've played it before, there's plenty more Legacy of Kain content coming soon. I'm working on deep dives into each and every one of these games, discussing their plot, their themes, their development, and so much more. And of course, we're starting with the OG, Blood Omen Legacy of Kain. Now with that said, I have nothing else to say but see you on the next one, and as Kain would say, free will is an illusion. See ya.